Russia has been afraid of this moment for 4 years. Since the first days of the full-scale invasion, Moscow has watched the list of Western weapons flowing to Ukraine with a specific kind of attention, monitoring not just what arrived, but what had not arrived yet, what red line had not been crossed, what capability Ukraine still lacked that kept the military balance from shifting decisively. Advanced fighter jets were always at the top of that list. F-16s arrived. Ukraine learned to fly them. Russia adapted. The battlefield changed, but not as dramatically as either side had hoped or feared. And now, Gripen. Ukraine's defense minister confirmed that a deal to supply Ukraine with Swedish Gripen fighter jets could be signed within months. Within months. This is not a vague promise. This is not a conditional commitment subject to 12 layers of political approval. This is a timeline, a specific, credible, near-term timeline for Ukraine receiving one of the most capable multi-role combat aircraft in the world. And the implications of what that means for the air war over Ukraine, for Russia's ability to sustain its bombing campaign, for the military balance that has shaped this conflict's trajectory, are being absorbed right now in every serious military planning center from Washington to Moscow. Today, we go deep into the Gripen deal. What this aircraft actually is, why it matters more than the F-16, what it changes on the battlefield, and why Russia's 4-year effort to prevent Ukraine from getting advanced air power may be about to fail. Stay with me. Let's start with what the Gripen actually is, because it is less famous than the F-16 but, for Ukraine's specific situation, potentially more useful. The JS-39 Gripen is a Swedish multi-role fighter produced by Saab. It is a fourth-generation aircraft, comparable in generation to the F-16, but designed with a very different philosophy. Where American aircraft are built around the assumption of operating from large, well-established air bases with extensive support infrastructure, the Gripen was specifically designed to operate from austere environments. Short runways, improvised airstrips, roads, bases that have been damaged and partially repaired. That design philosophy, born from Sweden's Cold War strategy of dispersing its air force to survive a Soviet first strike on major air bases, makes the Gripen exceptionally well suited to Ukraine's situation. Ukraine's air bases have been under sustained Russian attack since the first hours of the invasion. Runways have been struck, facilities damaged. The ability to operate from fixed, established locations has been compromised. Ukraine has been moving aircraft constantly, dispersing them to reduce vulnerability, operating from locations that would challenge many aircraft's ability to function effectively. The Gripen was built for exactly this kind of environment. Beyond the basing flexibility, the Gripen carries a sophisticated weapons suite. Advanced air-to-air missiles for engaging Russian aircraft, precision air-to-ground munitions for striking targets on the front line and behind it, electronic warfare capabilities, modern sensors and avionics that give its pilots a situational awareness advantage over older Russian aircraft types. And critically, the Gripen is already partially NATO-compatible. Sweden is now a NATO member. Its aircraft systems, its maintenance procedures, its training programs are integrated into the NATO framework in ways that make support and sustainment significantly more straightforward than it would be for more exotic aircraft types. Now, let's talk about what advanced fighters actually change on the battlefield, because there is a tendency in popular coverage to treat fighter jet deliveries as symbolic, as a show of Western commitment rather than a genuine military game-changer. That tendency misunderstands what air power does in a modern conflict. Russia's bombing campaign against Ukraine has been conducted primarily from two platforms: long-range bombers firing cruise missiles from standoff distances inside Russian territory, beyond the range of most Ukrainian air defenses, and attack aircraft operating closer to the front, deploying the glide bombs that have been responsible for some of the most devastating strikes on Ukrainian cities. The glide bomb, the KAB series weapon that struck the kindergarten, that has been devastating Ukrainian front-line positions, is launched from aircraft flying inside Russian airspace beyond the range of ground-based air defense. Ukraine cannot currently intercept the launch aircraft because Ukraine does not have the fighters with the range and the weapons to reach those aircraft in Russian airspace. Gripen changes that calculation. Not immediately, not completely. The aircraft has to arrive, pilots have to train, logistics have to be established, tactics have to be developed. None of that happens overnight. But the trajectory matters as much as the immediate capability. Russia has been operating its glide bomb campaign with the confidence that the launch aircraft are safe. The Gripen introduces, for the first time, the possibility that Ukraine could develop the capability to reach those aircraft. That possibility alone changes Russian operational planning, forces Russia to fly differently, to launch from higher altitudes or greater distances, which reduces accuracy, to assign fighter escorts that were previously unnecessary, to allocate resources to a defensive problem that previously did not exist. Now, let's put the Gripen in the context of Ukraine's broader air power development. Because this is not a single transaction. It is the latest step in a deliberate, sustained effort to build Ukrainian air power from almost nothing. When the full-scale invasion began, Ukraine's air force was a relic. Soviet-era aircraft, aging maintenance infrastructure, pilots trained on doctrine that had not been updated in decades. Everyone expected it to be destroyed in the opening hours of the conflict. It was not. Ukrainian pilots flew their aging MiGs and Sukhois with extraordinary skill and audacity, forcing Russia to be significantly more cautious in its air operations than Moscow had planned. Russia never achieved the air superiority it expected, in part because Ukrainian pilots denied it at enormous personal cost, and in part because Ukrainian ground-based air defense proved far more effective than Russian planners anticipated. Then came the Western equipment, Stinger missiles, man-pads, advanced radar systems, and eventually, after prolonged and sometimes agonizing political debates in Washington and European capitals, the F-16. The F-16 deliveries represented a significant upgrade. Modern avionics, NATO-standard weapons, training pipelines that connect Ukrainian pilots to the broader Western military system. The aircraft have been used effectively, shooting down Russian cruise missiles and drones, providing ground support in certain conditions. But the F-16 was always a stepping stone, not a destination. Its impact was real, but bounded by the specific limitations of Ukraine's operational environment and the political restrictions placed on its use. The Gripen is the next step, and it comes at a moment when Ukraine's ability to train pilots on Western aircraft, integrate new systems, and develop tactics for sophisticated platforms has matured significantly. Here is what Russia is most afraid of, not just the Gripen specifically, the trajectory it represents. 4 years ago, the debate was about whether Ukraine should receive anti-tank missiles. Then it was about whether to provide artillery. Then long-range missiles. Then air defense systems. Then F-16s. Each step was preceded by warnings that the transfer would be escalatory, that it would cross a red line, that Russia would respond in ways that made the transfer not worth the risk. Each time the transfer happened, and Russia adapted rather than escalated to the catastrophic levels that the warnings predicted. The Gripen follows the same pattern. The warnings are there, Russia will protest, Russian officials will issue stern statements, Russian state media will describe it as NATO aggression, and then Ukraine will receive the aircraft and begin the work of integrating them into its operations. But here is what is different about this moment compared to all the previous steps. Ukraine is now operating F-16s. It has the Western aircraft maintenance infrastructure, the NATO-compatible logistics, the training pipelines, the institutional knowledge of how to absorb and operate modern Western aircraft at a tempo that actually matters militarily. Adding Gripens to an air force that already flies F-16s is a much smaller operational leap than any of the previous steps were. Ukraine has already crossed the hard barriers. The Gripen does not represent a new category of challenge. It represents a deepening of a capability Ukraine is already developing. That is what Russia is watching, not just the specific aircraft, the direction of travel. Ukraine's air power is not at its ceiling. It is being built, systematically, with more capable aircraft arriving at regular intervals, with training programs producing more pilots, with logistics systems that are becoming more sophisticated and more resilient. And Zelensky has made clear that this process will not stop until Ukraine has the air power it needs to defend its airspace and protect its people from the bombing campaign that Russia has been conducting for 4 years. Watch the timeline for the Gripen deal. Watch whether the signing happens within the months that Ukraine's defense minister described, or whether political complications push it further. Watch how Russia responds publicly and whether that response differs from its previous reactions to Western weapons transfers. Watch whether the F-16 operational experience in Ukraine is producing the tactical innovations that would allow Gripen pilots to be effective faster than previous Western aircraft integration timelines suggested was possible. Because the moment Ukraine's Gripen pilots are airborne and operational is a moment that has been 4 years in the making. Russia has been dreading it since the first day of the invasion, and Zelensky has been building toward it. One aircraft, one training program, one political battle at a time, ever since. The next video drops in 48 hours. Do not miss it.